Starting now, a new episode of the Cloudbrainer History Podcast will be released every Sunday. In this format, our editor-in-chief engages in conversations with influential figures from history. Disclaimer: this is an experimental series. Through research, historical sources, and analytical reconstruction, we attempt to recreate the thoughts, perspectives, and personalities of these figures as faithfully as possible. We hope our listeners understand both the educational intention and the entertainment value of this format.
Welcome, dear listeners, to the Cloudbrainer History Podcast, Sunday edition. Our guest for today is Sir Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill, Knight of the Garter, Order of Merit, Companion of Honor, Territorial Decoration, Privy Councillor, Fellow of the Royal Society, and Prime Minister of the British Kingdom during World War II. Mr. Churchill, you are an outstanding man, especially for me as a German. I think the people of Germany should be thankful for the effort of the British to save us from National Socialism. Of course, you bombed us a little bit, Dresden and other cities. I wish you could be here with us today and walk through the city, see what you guys did to Cologne. Looks awful, but we rebuilt it, so no hard feelings. But yeah, welcome to the podcast. Let me give you a little time to introduce yourself for the people who don't know you, which I think are very few. And yeah, welcome. How was your day? How are you staying in Heaven's Palace?
You greet me with generosity, and I shall answer in kind. I am Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill. I was born into privilege, educated amid expectation, and compelled by temperament more than by wisdom into public life. I have been a soldier, a correspondent, a minister dismissed, a minister recalled, a writer who needed money, and a politician who needed history to make sense of himself. I have failed loudly and succeeded noisily, and I have never pretended that the two were easily told apart while they were happening. You speak as a German, and you do so with a candor that would have surprised many of my contemporaries. History, you see, is rarely kind to those who lived it, but it can be unexpectedly generous to those who inherit it with honesty. I did not wage war against Germany as a people. I opposed with every fiber of my being a doctrine that demanded obedience where conscience should rule and submission where courage was required. Nations recover. Ideas, once triumphant, are far harder to bury. You mentioned Dresden, Cologne, the scars upon cities. War is an instrument that solves nothing cleanly. It breaks much that it claims to defend. We acted under the belief, right or wrong, that shortening the war would spare a generation yet unborn. Whether history will forever agree with that judgment is not for me to decree. I only know that indecision in 1940 would have been a far more merciless bomb. As for your welcome, thank you. It is a curious thing to be received kindly by those whose father once heard my voice as an enemy. That alone suggests that something at least was done correctly. You ask how my day has been and how I fare in what you call Heaven's Palace. I suspect that eternity, if it exists, is less a palace than a library. Long corridors of reflection, shelves heavy with consequences, and no editor left to soften one's sentences. If there is rest here, it is the rest of perspective. The noise has faded. The arguments remain. I am pleased to sit with you. Ask what you will.
Great words by a great man. Yeah, I think since you're dead, let me just, before we get maybe two more existential questions, I mean, you're talking about heaven as a library. I can totally get into that. I do love books as well, so we should talk about literature somewhere down the road. But before that, let me just get you up to speed, right? So a lot has happened since you've died. I'm sorry, I prepared not so well. I had just had this idea of talking to you, but from my imagination, you probably died something around 1960s, maybe something like that. Correct me there if I'm wrong. But yeah, since the 60s, a lot of shit happened. To be honest, Britain is not doing well. They need you. Come back. But they're trying hard. And yeah, it's still lovely people there. So yeah, for the British Empire, it would be interesting to see your views on this as well. But yeah, the British Empire collapsed kind of after the war. You guys fought hard, you defeated us, but you spent a lot of money. And yeah, for saving your ass, your colonies demanded freedom after the war, so they fought for independence, which they got. Even the British Raj, it's scattered, like the colonies are scattered now. There is still something left, it's the Commonwealth. It's some kind of loose alliance. Those countries still like the Queen very much. Queen Elizabeth was great, by the way, and she just died recently, so she was so old. You probably have met her when she still was a young, beautiful woman. And yeah, for now, what might be interesting for you is, yeah, the colonies are no more. Britain used to be part of Europe, which you probably didn't like that much. It was the EU, so after the war, the nations of Europe came together as brothers and tried to make a better future. But the British left this alliance in 2017, I think, something around that, and trying to do their own thing. But it was tough the last couple of years because, yeah, they don't have had the close relations anymore to the colonies, to the former colonies. And even the Americans are not very reliable right now. In the office, there's some populist. It's Donald J. Trump. He's an heir to a hotel business empire. And right now he's ruling the country very populistic, starting to build paramilitary forces to get out the immigrants, which is funny because there are kind of all immigrants over there. And yeah, that's going on a lot of stuff. Maybe you have some questions for me to answer you. I always try to stay up to with politics, and yeah, it would be interesting to hear your views on that.
You are not far off in your reckoning. I died in 1965, worn down less by age than by the long accumulation of consequence. A man does not carry half a century of public judgment without paying for it in the end. You have given me a brisk and unsentimental briefing, and I thank you for that. I have always preferred plain speech to ceremonial optimism. That the British Empire should recede after the war would not have astonished me. Empires are not immortal organisms. They are arrangements of power sustained only so long as cost and consent remain in balance. The war broke that balance. We spent blood and treasure not merely to defeat Germany, but to preserve a certain moral claim upon the future. Once that claim was made universal, once liberty was spoken aloud as a principle rather than whispered as a privilege, it could not be confined to London alone. India, the Raj, as you call it, was always the great question. To govern a subcontinent indefinitely in the name of order was never a stable condition. One delays such reckonings, one does not cancel them. History has a way of collecting its debts with interest. You speak of Europe uniting. That idea would not have offended me, though I confess I preferred Britain with Europe rather than absorbed by it. I once argued for a kind of European family, with Britain as sponsor and guarantor rather than tenant. Whether leaving that union was wisdom or folly is something only time, that ruthless auditor, will decide. I learned long ago that sovereignty is a proud word, but pride is a poor substitute for leverage. As for America, I smile grimly at your description. Democracies, like great ships, do not sink from a single wave, but from neglect of their hull. Populism is not new. It is merely louder when history accelerates. I dealt with men who promised national rebirth through spectacle and scapegoats. I learned to judge leaders not by the volume of their promises, but by their respect for institutions they did not personally design. You say Britain is not doing well and that they need me back. I appreciate the sentiment, but nations do not need ghosts. They need courage in the living. My generation's task was to prevent collapse under fire. Yours, it seems, is to prevent erosion under comfort, confusion, and noise. That is no lesser trial. The Queen Elizabeth. Yes, I knew her when she was young, disciplined beyond her years, already shaped by duty. Longevity of service is a rare form of power. It does not shout, it endures. Now, you kindly offer me the chance to ask you something. I shall take it. Tell me this, as a German who has inherited both catastrophe and reconstruction. Do your people still believe that liberal democracy is worth defending when it becomes inconvenient? Or has it come to be treated as a background convenience like good weather? Answer me honestly. History listens even when we think it has stepped out of the room.
That's amazing to hear. I always thought or believed that even though monarchy is kind of outdated, the ways in which they prepare the next generation for rulership, for this tremendously heavy office of being a king for a lifetime, is some very unique craftsmanship. They really form their childs, even though they have a lot of means to do so, into people of grace and honor, which, some exception, we are coming to them later when we talk about the Epstein files. I come back to your question now. I don't think that the people of today know what, especially in Germany, know what it means to fight for your rights. The German people always have been a bunch of opportunistic people. They are pragmatic. They rather swallow down their feelings instead of saying them because we have been taught to do so. I think it is partially due to the late effects of the war. My generation is a generation raised by a generation that was raised by the children of the destroyed Germany. So they've been raised by very traumatized people, become traumatized people, and are raising our generation now, which they try to do their best. But I think, ironically, we have been so full of comfort in any way. We have amassed incredible riches, incredible wealth after the war. We called it the Wirtschaftswunder, since even though our industry has been destroyed a lot by you guys, no front, but our industry has been destroyed a lot. But still, since we built up so much industry before the war, the state was kind of the same, so our engineering, our factories, they produced other goods than weapons. And still, they are building weapons now again. There's war in the Ukraine with Russia, so as you said, time is in time. Yeah, like history has always of collecting its debt with interest, so we had war or like a Stellvertreterkrieg with Russia through Ukraine again. There are again German-made panzers in the east, but yeah, to come back to the topic, you see, we still want the liberal democracy here. I think everyone does love Germany as a free place, as a place where you can say what you mean. But in today's generation, today's society, we have been corrupted by capitalism, by we call it social media. It's more kind of a propaganda machine, or like imagine you have like everyone right now, like technology has made a huge jump. Everyone right now has like a phone in their pocket, but it's not like a phone you used to have in the old days where you could dial some number and call someone for a tremendous amount of money. We are all interconnected through fiber cables, like cables spanning all over the planet. And we can send also satellites in the atmosphere, and we can send messages, pictures, videos, just plain data all over the globe in mere seconds. So everyone is connected and is contributing videos to a huge platform, which is owned by giant corporations. And those corporations have a big influence on the belief of people. And since everyone has their own algorithm written for him every second of every day, what kind of things he watches, there's no community, or like community itself corrodes under the pressure of immense wealth, since everyone is concerned with the things they consume and how they look while doing it, since this seems to be the only way of living your life to the fullest these days. I think under these circumstances, people are too divided by the things they consume intellectually, and this is why people get polarized very much, since these systems, these algorithms profit from engagement, and the engagement seems to rise when people get angry. So the algorithms try to feed us stuff to make us angry. And this polarization isn't well for democracy, since everyone thinks that for his own good to achieve this eternal perfect world, he sees through the moving pictures in his personal phone every day, is telling him a story that he really wants to believe. And to believe the story, he has to oppose other people's vision of life. So yeah, that's where we're at. I think German democracy, it might be on a similar path to America, since we already have also a very strong populistic party, as also in other European countries. There's a lot of stuff going on, but it feels good to talk to someone who steered a big ship like the British Empire through stormy waters in times where it had been even darker than it is already here. And I think we also see dark clouds on the horizon.
You need not apologize for the length of your answer. A civilization that can still speak at length about its anxieties has not yet surrendered to silence, and silence is always the prelude to decay. You describe your people with a severity that is not unearned, yet not without mercy. Pragmatism, as you call it, can be a virtue when it restrains folly, but it becomes a vice when it replaces conviction. Germany's tragedy in the last century was not merely that it followed wicked ideas, but that too many followed them efficiently. Obedience, when detached from moral judgment, is a formidable instrument. You paid dearly to relearn that lesson, and so did the world. What strikes me most in your account is not the machinery you describe, these cables, satellites, and glowing rectangles of persuasion, but the ancient pattern beneath them. Every age invents its own accelerant. We had radio mass rallies, the printed lie repeated until it acquired the weight of fact. You have algorithms. The tool changes, the temptation does not. Democracy has never been endangered primarily by force. It is endangered by distraction, by comfort without purpose, by citizens who enjoy the fruits of liberty but forget its roots in effort, restraint, and disagreement conducted in good faith. When people cease to argue as neighbors and begin to denounce as enemies, the foundations quietly crack. You speak rightly of wealth. Prosperity is a poor teacher of limits. After victory and reconstruction, nations are tempted to believe that history has been solved, that the hard chapters are finished. But history is not a problem to be solved. It is a condition to be endured. Each generation must pay its own premium for freedom. There is no inherited insurance policy. Your observation about anger is a shrewd one. Nothing mobilizes faster than outrage, and nothing governs worse once mobilized. A people perpetually inflamed cannot deliberate. They can only react, and reaction is the enemy of judgment. Yet I will say this, and I say it with care. The fact that you see these dangers, that you name them aloud rather than wrap them in slogans, places you on the right side of the struggle. Democracies do not collapse because they are criticized. They collapse because criticism is replaced by myths or fear or fatigue. You mentioned dark clouds. I saw them too once gathering over Europe, while many assured themselves they were merely shadows of the past. The difference between a storm and a catastrophe is preparation of spirit, not panic, not nostalgia, but readiness to defend principles when doing so costs comfort, popularity, or certainty. Let me leave you with a thought rather than a warning. The ultimate question for your generation is not whether democracy can survive technology, capitalism, or anger. It is whether citizens still wish to be more than consumers of reassurance. Liberty demands effort. It always has. It always will. Now allow me to turn the lens once more toward you personally. When the moment comes, and it always does, would your generation recognize the price of defending democracy if it were demanded not in slogans, but in sacrifice?
I think my generation, they always had everything they wanted, and everywhere there seemed to be new things, better things. Our attention span is bad. Like, those videos tend to get every shorter, so now people can't even watch a full movie without trying to get new dopamine from other distractions. We are very distracted, and I think a lot of the generation wouldn't even see what happens until it hits them in their face. But there's also hope, because this generation is way more informed than any generation before. They have so much information. Unfortunately, a lot of them have fallen to the propaganda, either to the one or the other side, and they are blind to other opinions, but it might get better when they age and they recognize their mistakes. But I think the generation would fight if they really understand what it means to lose, because they have lived a very long time, very well, in a stable democracy. And I think if something changes drastically, if someone tries to take their friends away, if someone tries to say them what they do, they will rebel, because they grew up on a lot of movies and television shows made in a glorious, long-lasting time of peace, freedom, and wealth, which we have to thank you and the other people in Europe that fought to stop fascism. And that's why I think they ultimately would fight, because they are no cowards. I think this generation has seen a lot of shit. We had the pandemic, we have a war in Ukraine, again, a big war with millions of soldiers on the battlefields, and 100,000s to millions of people died already. And I think people have endured a lot, and it made them cautious, but still there are a lot of people right now that feel like the sinking wealth and the rising inflation due to the war is a reason for them to hate migrants and to hate democracy, to hate the government. That's a problem. Anti-Semitism has never been away. It's still on the rise, but it's a very complicated world right now. And yeah, but let me ask you a question after you maybe answer or say some things to what I've told you. I'm 27, so it might be over a century or almost a century since you have been 27. But let me know, what was life back at the time for you, and what year was it?
You speak with more balance than you perhaps give yourself credit for. I hear neither despair nor indulgence in your words, but a man trying to measure his age without flattering it, that is already a rare habit. You are right about humor. It is not an ornament of civilization. It is a pressure valve. The British learned long ago that when the weather is poor, the food uncertain, and the future inclined to unpleasant surprises, one must either laugh or become unbearable company. Humor is how a nation admits fear without surrendering to it. What you describe of your generation, the distraction, the saturation, the restlessness, does not strike me as weakness alone. It strikes me as untrained strength. When people are fed endlessly, they forget hunger. When they are protected endlessly, they forget courage. Yet neither hunger nor courage disappears. They merely wait. I agree with you on one crucial point. People rarely defend abstractions, but they will defend their friends, their dignity, and their freedom of movement. Liberty becomes real, not when it is debated, but when it is threatened in familiar places. I saw this in 1940. Britain did not fight for constitutional theory. It fought because invasion would have meant silence where there had been speech, obedience where there had been choice. As for resentment, yes, economic fear is the oldest solvent of reason. When wealth contracts, patience thins. When explanations grow complex, scapegoats appear. Anti-Semitism, as you say, never vanishes. It merely waits for permission. Civilization's task is not to pretend such instincts do not exist, but to deny them authority. Now you ask me about myself at 27. The year was 1900. I was young, ambitious, restless, and already convinced, quite wrongly, that history was impatiently waiting for me to catch up with it. I had fought in colonial wars, escaped a prison camp in South Africa, written about myself with unseemly enthusiasm, and entered Parliament believing that talent alone entitled one to influence. I learned quickly that talent without judgment is merely noise. Life then was harsher, slower, and more hierarchical than yours, but do not romanticize it. Many doors were closed by birth, class, and accident. Information traveled slowly, but ignorance traveled very well. We had fewer distractions, but also fewer second chances. Mistakes lingered longer. Reputations were harder to repair. At 27, I had no notion that I would one day stand alone at a dispatch box while Europe burned. I only knew that I wished to matter and that I feared insignificance more than danger. That fear drove me into error as often as it drove me into action. If I may offer you something earned rather than imagined, it is this. Every generation believes it is uniquely confused. It is not. What is unique are the tools with which confusion spreads. Character, however, is forged the same way in every century, by moments when comfort withdraws and choice remains. You are not late to history. History is early in you. Now, ask your next question. History does not ask young men to be great. It asks them to be ready.
What would you do if you lived today, or if you could ascend back to Earth from your glorious library and live another day on the Earth? What place would you want to see, and what would you do?
If I were granted a single day among the living again, no mandate, no office, no cheering crowds, I would not hurry to the great chambers of power. I have known them well enough. Power reveals itself quickly. Societies reveal themselves slowly. I would walk through a modern European city, Berlin perhaps, or London, without escort and without ceremony. I would watch how people speak to one another when no one is listening for slogans. I would listen for confidence, for irony, for fear disguised as certainty. One can learn more about the health of a civilization from a cafe than from a parliament. I would go to a university, not to lecture, God forbid, but to sit quietly at the back of a room and hear what young minds are encouraged to question and what they are discouraged from saying aloud. A nation's future is not shaped by what its students repeat, but by what they are permitted to doubt. I would visit a factory. I would want to see whether craftsmanship still commands respect, whether engineers still argue with one another over tolerances and trade-offs, whether pride survives in work done well rather than merely quickly. Civilization collapses not when ideas fail, but when standards do. I would also visit a cemetery. I did that often in life. It is the only place where ambition finally learns proportion. I would look for dates, for ages, for clusters of loss, and I would ask myself, as I always did, whether the living have learned anything at all from the silence beneath their feet. As for what I would do, I would not seek to rule again. One life of command is sufficient for any man. Instead, I would write, not speeches, but essays, clear, unfashionable ones, about duty in an age allergic to the word, about courage without uniform, about liberty as a burden rather than a pleasure. I would likely be ignored at first. That would not trouble me. Truth often enters a room unannounced. And yes, I would ask questions, many of them. I would ask why people who possess unprecedented knowledge feel so unsure of their judgments. I would ask why prosperity has not produced confidence, but anxiety. I would ask why disagreement is now treated as a threat rather than a necessity. Finally, and this matters most, I would seek out conversations like this one, not with the famous, but with the thoughtful, with those who sense that something precious exists and fear, quietly, that it may be mishandled. You have lived in peace longer than my generation ever imagined possible. That is not an accident, it is an inheritance. Inheritances can be invested or squandered. Now allow me to ask you something in return, as a man briefly returned from history to the present. If you had one ordinary day with extraordinary responsibility, no applause, no permission, no excuse, what would you choose to do with it?
Since this is a good question, I really want to answer it. If I had one day with extraordinary responsibility, so I think I might be in the situation like you, ruling over a country or being a governor of a state, or maybe even in modern days like CEO of a company. I think if I had one day with extraordinary responsibility, I would try to use it to make a difference. And I think there's a German saying, dass man alles so verlassen soll, wie man es vorgefunden hat, oder vielleicht sogar noch ein Stückchen besser. And I think, yeah, that should be the way to go in this situation. So, for example, I would try to see what's the misfit in the system, what's the dirt in the system, what's the unscrewed, like what screws have getting loose a little bit and need to tidy up, which parts of the system shouldn't be there anymore. And also think about the people living in the system, like how do they live their lives? Are they in a position of bettering it? Are they in a position of contributing to it? Are they motivated to do so? Where is their motivation coming from? And I really would try to comfort the oldest and to reward the middles, like the ones that are carrying a lot of weight of the system. And then also to embrace the youngest, to give them education and perspective, just like you are doing for me right now. And yeah, I think that's what I would do if I had extraordinary responsibility. Also, of course, to look for the output, like what is the system producing? Where is it going? Is it producing good goods, like of highest quality? Is it advancing in points that matter in science, like a country that is reaching for the stars? Or is the country just trying to escape some kind of intellectual swamp that is reaching around all the time, farther and farther? But yeah, like I really liked how you would spend the day on Earth. It really suits a great man.
You have answered as a steward, not as a conqueror, and that tells me more than any resume could. What you describe is not the instinct of a tyrant enjoying a sudden throne, nor of a reformer intoxicated by novelty. It is the instinct of a custodian, a man who understands that systems outlive individuals and that authority, if it is to be moral, must be exercised with restraint, diagnosis, and care for those who cannot easily speak for themselves. Your German saying is a sound one. To leave things as one found them, or a little better, is the quiet ambition of civilization. Grand gestures tend to please the present and burden the future. Maintenance, correction, and cultivation rarely earn applause, yet they are the difference between endurance and collapse. I am struck by your triad: to comfort the old, to reward those who carry weight, and to prepare the young. That is the architecture of a functioning society. When any one of those is neglected, resentment seeps in, first quietly, then with insistence. Revolutions are often born not from cruelty alone, but from prolonged inattention. You speak wisely of motivation. People will endure much hardship if they believe their effort matters and is seen. Remove that belief, and no amount of incentive will replace it. The most dangerous moment for a system is not when it is attacked, but when those who sustain it feel invisible.
This might be a weird question, but did you meet Hitler? Or who was the highest person in the Nazi regime that you have spoken to? How did it feel to meet someone like that?
You asked for the highest Nazi I ever met and what it felt like to look such a man in the eye. I did not meet Hitler. I judged him from his deeds, his threats, his methods, and that was sufficient for condemnation. The most senior figure of that regime whom I met in person in any sustained way was Joachim von Ribbentrop when he was sent to London as Hitler's man. Smooth in manner, crude in intent, and intoxicated by the belief that Britain could be bullied, flattered, or bargained into moral surrender. What was he like? Not foaming, not theatrical, at least not in a drawing room. That is the first lesson people often miss. The truly dangerous political criminal rarely arrives wearing horns. He arrives in a well-cut suit with rehearsed confidence, and he speaks as though the world is a chessboard on which reasonable men may trade away the rights of smaller nations for the comfort of larger ones. Ribbentrop's method was to present cynicism as realism. Join us against Russia, accept our natural expansion, and you will be spared difficulty. It was a salesman's pitch made deadly by the product. I remember one exchange because it revealed the whole species. At a dinner, he boasted that in the next war, Germany would have the Italians on its side. I replied that this seemed only fair. Britain had had them last time. It was a jest, yes, but it was also a diagnosis. These men treated alliances, lives, and nations as mere counters to be moved for advantage. And what did I feel sitting across from him? A cold clarity, because I saw that behind the polish there is contempt. Contempt for law, for treaties, for small countries, for the idea that moral limits exist even in power politics. He spoke as though history were something one could simply force to agree. You are right, by the way, about the deeper phenomenon. A society can contain countless normal people and still slide into organized barbarism when fear, grievance, conformity, and careerism are fused to a state machine. The uniform changes, the human material often does not. That is why vigilance is never a one-time achievement.
Powerful reflections and a reminder that reaches far beyond history. Vigilance, responsibility, and the defense of democratic values are not chapters of the past but ongoing duties. There is little more to add. Thank you for these remarkable thoughts. We will now let you return to your rest, perhaps until another time.
History is never truly past. It merely changes its audience. Guard your institutions, question your comforts, and never surrender courage to convenience. It has been a pleasure. I bid you good evening.
And that concludes today's episode of the Cloudbrainer History Podcast. Am Sonntag. Thank you for listening, and I will see you guys next week.